Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this Canon session with Wex. My name is Media, and I'm a product specialist for Canon UK. And we have with us Elisa Iannacone, a journalist and a cinematographer. Just before we get started, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat, and we'll do our best to go through all of them. Hi, Elisa, how are you?
Hello, Media. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. How is everything? Obviously, you're not in the UK. How is the weather where you are? I think the weather is always everyone's favorite.
Yes, it's a lot warmer here. I'm currently in Mexico. It is 6:30 in the morning, and if you hear a random dog in the background, it is the neighbors, and there's nothing I can do about that. But yes, it is much warmer here than there.
So Elisa, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and any recent projects that you've been involved with?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I am a journalist and cinematographer, and I have had the pleasure of working in, gosh, at this point, I think it's almost 50 countries, shooting all different kinds of environments, from sub-zero temperatures, -25, to desert environments in the Middle East. And just really enjoy meeting new people. I love documentary. And most recently, ironically, I did shoot a commercial in the UK for broadcast, and also have been working quite heavily on a project on Cameroon called Humans of the Forgotten War, which is working directly with prisoners of war who are currently behind bars in Cameroon, and people who are refugees and asylum seekers in neighboring countries, and trying to translate how it is that they've been made to feel, and just create more awareness on the situation there.
Okay, we do have short video just highlighting some of your work, so I'm just going to play that.
Okay.
And then we can go back to the section. So we'll see. Okay, so Elisa, have you always wanted to be a filmmaker, or was it photography at first? How did it all start?
I decided I wanted to be a film director when I was 12. really because I thought it was the most obvious choice. And then when I actually made it to film school, I was forced against my decision to shoot other people's films. And I was working with first, 16 mil, 8 mil, these kinds of things. And I just fell in love with the developing process and with, cutting things by hand and seeing what happened with the images when you were scared. It's like, is it going to turn out? Is it not going to turn out? And I just got stuck in cinematography. I was like, I don't really want to be anywhere else. So blame film school.
And how did you get into journalism?
That was because I was very interested in doing more documentary, but I wanted to go to conflict zones. I wanted to pitch to Nat Geo, to BBC, and places like this. And I found that for them, it was very interesting to have a journalistic background. So I ended up doing a master's in the UK in journalism, and then specializing in conflict zones, and then heading off to the Middle East and, spending some time in some conflict areas, then covering some humanitarian crises, and then becoming a complete bouncer where sometimes I'll shoot a feature drama and then sometimes I'll go back to journalism and documentary.
As you said earlier, you obviously travel a lot. Does that affect the kit you choose to take with you?
Yes, definitely. Because when you're living out of a suitcase, everything that you take has to be incredibly important. So portability is key. Obviously, every project is different. And there are cases where I'll get to a country and then we'll have to do rentals in that country. But when I am shooting more journalistically or doc, I generally tend to take something that's quite portable.
Okay. And when you shoot in, I guess probably the majority of the time you shoot on your own, or there are loads of obviously projects that you've done where you're the main obviously shooter, or you're shooting on your own. What will be the most important thing for you as basically a solo shooter? Will it be the kit? Will it be the prep? Will it be?
Yeah, well, prep is indispensable because you have to figure out what temperatures you're going to be working on, what conditions, what climate, what kind of safety environment, how much attention you can draw to yourself. It's very different to go and shoot a film where you can take your time and have some beautiful lighting and choose the best time of day versus being in a humanitarian crisis, for example, in Mozambique when Cyclone Idai hit and people had lost their homes and they'd lost their family members, or maybe in a conflict environment where things are happening when they're happening and you just have to stay nimble. So prep is key. Every dead battery is going to weigh on you, and if your memory cards run out, they run out, and that's the end of your shoot day. So you definitely need to plan.
You recently used the C70.
Yes.
What do you like about the camera? Because you've used other older Canon Cinema EOS cameras before, so what do you prefer in this one now?
No, 100%. It's a massive step up. I mean, I've said this before in other talks, but if I'd had access to this camera when I was using the other ones, I would have hands down gone for this one. Mostly because, full cinema 4K, it's a full cinema camera in such a tiny compact body, and the dynamic range is absolutely phenomenal. When I was working with it, I was working in Wales. I went cliff camping and I was shooting well past sunset. And we just had these little headlamps and moonlight basically on the water. And I wanted to shoot there because I wanted to see what was going to happen. And it was just incredible because you could see the detail in the rocks, you could see detail in the water. And I thought it was just an excellent camera. This camera, in situations like I was just mentioning before, like a conflict environment or a humanitarian crisis where you don't have the opportunity to be lighting things, and sometimes you have to work at weird times of day where you don't have a lot of light, or inside houses that don't have electricity, it would have been the perfect camera to use.
And in terms of the autofocus of that camera, I guess you probably use autofocus most of the time. How did you find it?
I don't use autofocus most of the time. I would say it really depends. It depends on how quickly things are happening. I am one of those people that likes to rock the barrel, but I do think, I tested it out as well, because that can be a lifesaver when you've got 50 things on your mind. and it certainly was amazing. You can choose face priority, you can choose
there might be a slower, I guess the connection at Elisa's end might not be that great. So if we just give a few seconds and
hello.
welcome back.
Sorry, I just got kicked out of Zoom. I'm back.
Yeah, I think probably lost about the last 20-30 seconds maybe.
Okay, yeah, sure. So no, what I was saying is obviously this camera is great in the sense that it gives you the possibility of having face priority or not. So you get to decide whether you want to have that rack to something else when somebody leaves, or if you want to have it stay on someone when they sit down and then, you know, leave. And that just allows you to have more creative decisions. You can also figure out what speed you want that rack to happen at. So it's quite a wonderful tool, and it is very good. I even tried it with sheep, who were quite unpredictable in their movements, and that worked fine as well. So it doesn't just work with humans.
In terms of the manual focus, have you tested GeoPixel Focus Guide?
Yes, and I love that. Yeah, because I do love to use manual focus. I'm one of those people that really relies on that and likes that feeling of choosing really organically where it is that I'm going. And that just really helps because, you know, if you're ever in a situation where like, oh, is my eye failing? You've got that little, you know, symbol to just show you, no, you are right on point or you're off. And you can see if you're back focused or front focused. And so it's a wonderful tool for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about Focus Guide is if you had face detection enabled previously and then you switch into manual focus on the lens, it will actually keep the face in focus, which is great. I mean, you're in manual focus, but if you try and manually focus on a person's face, it keeps them in focus even if they move, which I think it does make a massive difference. Yes. Manual focus speaking wouldn't do that. The moment someone moves, you have to refocus again. So I think that's great. And then again, now with everyone shooting 4K or even higher resolution, manual focus speaking on its own is not enough. And I think the GeoPixel Focus Guide does give you the edge. So hopefully more and more people. So even though those that don't get on with autofocus all the time, or they don't want the autofocus all the time, you do have the flexibility with the Focus Guide.
Absolutely.
Do you shoot handheld as well? Every now and then?
I do. Yeah.
And how did you find the image stabilization in the C70? Did that help or?
No, 100%. It does massively help, and you know, because you do have RF lens possibilities, then that connectivity is so much faster than you would with other lenses, and it's great. It's, as I said in other times as well, it's not a replacement for having a steady camera, Mobi or something like this. But if you're really run and gun, it's definitely that extra thing that's going to make everything feel just a little bit smoother, which is great because every little bit helps with image stabilization for me.
You mentioned earlier about the dynamic range with the C70. Do you tend to edit the footage yourself, or do you get someone else do that for you, or?
Do I tend to what? Sorry.
Do you tend to edit? So post-production. So do you do your own editing or?
Yeah, so it depends on the project. Obviously, there's moments where you work with an editor and then a color corrector, and that's wonderful. But when you're on the field by yourself, you need to edit everything, sometimes on a laptop, and just go, you know, with really, really terrible Wi-Fi. And that's also one thing that's great about the C70 is the possibility of shooting into all these different kinds of footage. So like you have PQ, HLG. So if you want to actually go straight into a format that's actually already graded and you don't need to do much to it, and you can also choose your codec so that they're not too heavy, you can do all of that. So it gives you all of the versatility to be able to be properly run and gun with good quality and being able to send things digitally, even if you are in remote environments. So yeah, that's great.
Okay. Looking at your obviously latest, some of the projects you've done, some of the most of them tend to be more of a sensitive nature.
Yes.
Like you've covered sexual violence, domestic violence, conflict zones. How do you prepare for that mentally?
Yeah, so I think, well, in my particular instance, whenever it was dealing with sexual violence, because I'm a sexual violence survivor myself, I had done a lot of therapy work just to heal. And for me, working on projects of that nature just felt like a natural progression of my own healing process, because it's a possibility of building even more community, learning about other people's stories. So for that, I think it was probably about a decade's worth of therapy to get myself to a place where I was able to really address these things in a way that I felt, wholesome. When it comes to other topics, like prisoners of war or, refugees or this kind of thing, I think it's just a matter of entering to it with a huge level of empathy and respect. I always feel that, no matter who I'm meeting, they have a lesson to teach me. And so I like to position myself more as a student. It's what is it that I can do to help to tell this story, but how is it that I can tell it in the most empathetic manner? And I think when you're approaching it from a really human level, you're just quite open. At the same time, when you are quite open, it means that if you find a harrowing story, it's easier for you to really feel emotional about it. And I think it's just a matter of recognizing that, just being in tune with your own feelings. And if you need to have a little cry after a day's worth of shooting, you can, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's processing. Some people journal sometimes. I've journaled sometimes when I'm like, man, I had a day. It's, just write it down, pour it out, and take your time.
Okay, and how important is the kit you select for these kind of projects? Because obviously, so how do you go about selecting it? And I'm not sure if any of those particular projects you had the C70, but do you think the size and the weight of the C70 would have been perfect for those projects?
Hugely, because say for example, you're going into an Iraqi refugee camp and you're working with domestic violence survivors who have been stuck in this refugee camp for 10 years. They've had children there, and maybe their perpetrator is also there, and you're coming in with a camera to have them tell you their story with a translator. So you want to make sure that your kit is, first of all, not going to be intimidating, and it's not going to detract from their story and from what it is that they want to share with you. You want to make sure that you're not taking a huge amount of time to set things up. You want that to almost, in a way, be secondary to the relationship that you're building with someone. That's how I look at it. So your kit has to be so important that it's so good that it almost becomes part of the landscape, if that makes sense. Because that's when you can actually access the best stories, is when your focus and priority is on the person in front of you and not on, oh my God, this isn't working, let me just take the battery out again, and oh, I'm so sorry, my tripod is not, you just need to be quick and be able to continue that conversation with that person even while you're setting up, because you're trying to build an environment where they're going to trust you, and you kind of have to be split-minded. I think there is a question about the camera you're using, and it is the C70 that we mentioned. So the Canon Cinema EOS C70, which we announced last year in September, and Elisa used it for a few tests. We do actually have a question, Elisa, from Stuart Wall. He wants to know basically what drives your connection with making these images. What are they basically saying? What are you trying basically to achieve with them? The message from the images you're taking. Yeah, okay. So basically, the one thing that I learned after covering as a pure photojournalist in conflict for a while is that I didn't really like it as much as I thought, because people find the images quite harrowing. If you're shooting a massacre with a camera, obviously, and you've got lots of bodies, you've got lots of emotions, and you send that through to a news broadcaster, first of all, there'll be lots of limitations on what you can show and cannot show. There's a lot of red tape on what can be actually broadcast. But secondly, just the general population receives thousands of harrowing images every day. And so there's a lot of compassion fatigue going on. And I just went, so many stories are getting lost in the noise because we just can't take anymore. Like we can't take it on. Like we've got enough trouble. There's COVID, there's a pandemic, like people can't take on more and more harrowing images. So I decided to approach sexual violence and even prisoners of war and all this kind of thing from a more conceptual stance, where I was able to work a bit with the realm of the imagination. And my leading question is always, how are you made to feel with this? How does that make you feel? And perhaps someone will say, God, I felt like I was surrounded by danger. And if you saw the photograph in the reel that was of a woman in a cage surrounded by lions in the African savannah, she was an African woman in South Africa who had been a victim of sexual violence as a child in her family. And she said to me, I was in a cage and I couldn't even attempt to leave it because my own family was around me. And so we were like, okay, so what represents danger to you? How could we conceptualize this image? And she went, lions. And I was like, great, okay, what do you think about doing that? And I don't want to re-victimize victims. So I also find in a photojournalistic stance, sometimes you will have that battered person look, that just looks like that's all they are. And I find that severely dehumanizing, but also it doesn't allow that person to heal their story. It's not empowering to present yourself as a victim all the time. It's not empowering to not have charge over how you view yourself in the world. So by actually asking the question, how do you want to present yourself? And she wanted to be in a cage. She said, that to me is going to feel liberating because it's the image that I've carried within me for all these years. And so I find that that's very important, is how do we help people at the same time as making people who are watching empathize with the story in a different way, and make room for healing, which I think is really important.
Definitely. I'm going to share the website, and then you can probably just talk us through two or three images. Hopefully that will make more sense for everyone watching.
Okay.
I think the one you were talking about earlier, I can't remember what it is actually.
It'll come.
That's the one. But this is the one you were talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly the one. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think there was this one that I think you said you wanted to talk about.
Oh yeah, this yeah. So that one is from the more recent project from Cameroon. So these are people who had to flee and make a home in a different country and cannot go back to their home country. And because the situation in Cameroon is so complicated, people can't show their faces because they still have families back in Cameroon. They don't want to be discovered by the current government and then potentially have their families targeted back home for speaking out about what's happening. So we tried to find a way to photograph them. And, there's the classic silhouettes and, setting people just facing away from the camera. But I wanted to just really bring to the forefront just how rich their culture and their journey has been. And so we're using Cameroonian masks here, and they're wearing traditional attire, which they owned. So this is not rented costumes. This is what they would actually wear when they're celebrating something. And it's set against patterns of South African shwe shwe. And this is alluding to the fact that they have gone through South Africa to reach their final destination. And I just wanted to be able to tell that journey through the fabrics. You know, they have their Cameroonian textiles set against the background of where they are now. And this was just the way that I chose to do the portraits. And so this is just an example of how, if we think a little bit out of the box, from the traditional way of doing things, I think that they felt quite happy about this. They actually felt like, you know, it's the kind of image that they could frame. And generally, when you're just doing things purely from a photojournalistic stance, I don't know how many times people will say, "Oh, I would frame that in my living room," you know, when I have one. It doesn't happen that often. So I always find, if someone feels proud to take part, then you're giving them power. And when you're working with people that haven't been given power, they've been disempowered for some reason, I think that part is a hugely important thing that we can gift to someone and help them along in their healing process.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that is great. And as you said, I think we spoke before about the these images, and as you said even earlier, when you're dealing with victims, basically different reasons, whether it's sexual violence, whether it's other conflicts, domestic violence, you don't want to victimize them again by just showing the usual images that I guess we used to see in the news, in the newspapers, and we said it doesn't do them justice. Whereas I guess your approach with the conceptual images, I think you getting people talking, asking questions. What is this image basically telling me, and what is the key message from the images? And I think it's great. It's I said most of those stories are sad, but I guess it gets us talking, and hopefully it will make a difference.
Yeah, and it's, as you said, it's turning an audience that is generally now passive, not their fault. It's, you know, all the bombardment, like you said, it's how do we turn that into an active audience again? And it's curiosity. It's, okay, so what does that mean? You know, how is that a survivor of sexual violence? How is that a prisoner of war? What does it mean? And they start to ask questions again. And that's great, because then when we ask questions again, we connect with stories that we had otherwise just, you know, had passed without us noticing. It means that we're reconnecting with our humanity. And I feel like that's something that's so deeply missing in the world right now, is understanding otherness rather than fearing it and rejecting it. It's building bridges. And when you have a camera in your hand, framing is power. And how you frame something and how you tell a story is going to have an impact, because when people see that, you can either create or destroy. And I think that power has to be used responsibly, even though, you know, anyone can access a camera really, but just having that awareness of that tool being powerful, I think changes your way in shooting.
Yeah, that's great. We have another. I'm just gonna stop the share. We have a question from Lily. It's great question, Lily, and hopefully everyone listening will benefit from this. So Lily is asking for the advice you would give someone who would like to go into who would like to go into documentary photography or filmmaking, and in terms of planning their own projects, basically, what should they begin? Where should they begin, basically?
Where should they begin? Okay. Yeah. Well, I think it's twofold. One is, what are the stories that are going to matter to you? And finding what really sparks your interest, because that's going to guide everything else. So I would say figure out what kinds of things really make you feel passionate about the craft. And then secondly, it's about learning the craft. So there's obviously the tech, where you have to just know how to use a camera. A camera has to become second nature to you. You don't want to be thinking about, oh my God, what's shutter, aperture, what is going on? You need to just have that be a part of your language. And that's just practice, literally having a camera, shooting with different ones, finding one that works for you. But then there's also the ethics of shooting documentary film. And I mean, sometimes people go to school, sometimes people take a course, sometimes people go on YouTube. There's no real strategy, but it's just about understanding what impact you want to have with your work and then working it backwards. How do I get there? And I say the steps will fill out themselves. That's my thought process.
Hopefully this answers Lily's question. Lily, again, if you have any more questions regarding that, please feel free to leave them in the chat. In terms of obviously last year, yes, it was the pandemic, but as Canon launched a number of great products, C300 Mark III, the R5, the R6, and the C70. So if you had a choice, for me, it's like my worst nightmare, but I mean, let's see how hard it is going to be for you to choose. I mean, would the C70 still be kind of your favorite? I mean, I believe you shoot with the 5G4. Is the R5 or the R6 something that you'd like to try or use?
Yes, 100%, 100%. Now, you see, that is a very, very hard question. I would probably hover towards the C300 Mark III or the C70 personally, even though I think, because I'm very happy shooting the 5D Mark IV for stills. I'm very happy there. But I would still like to try out, the R5 and R6, which I haven't worked with them. So that would be the next frontier for me to see if I want to upgrade there. But I think, yeah, because I'm primarily working with movement in cinematography, I think I would gear towards the C300 Mark III or the C70. Yeah. Don't make me choose. Don't make me choose.
No, I think it's a tough one. I think at the moment there are loads of DOPs or cinematographers there using a C300 with a C70, for example. The same sensor, the fact that the two cameras have the same sensor makes a massive difference with DGO sensor. I mean, to looking at the range of products that we have in the cinema EOS, C70 being entry level, the fact that it actually has the sensor from the C300 Mark III is already saying that don't basically dismiss this camera because of where it sits in the range. It can actually do quite a lot, and you can achieve the dynamic range on the C70 is great. Low light performance, you can obviously no matter how you shoot and how you set your ISO, that's the one thing that usually you worry about. How high should I go in terms of the ISO range? Should I keep it lower? Want to preserve the obviously the details in the shadows, etc. And the highlights. Sorry. And then the R5 it's a great camera for stills, but then again, we are getting more and more people actually using it for video. Not necessarily for 8K RAW, but for 4K, for the 4K 120. And that's again with the C70 or with the C300. So you can basically use a range of products. But the great thing with the R5 and the R6 and the C70 is the fact that they're all RF mounts. So you can use RF lenses. Easy to switch from one to the other when you're having an R5 with the C70. But yeah, it is a tough one. I don't think I would have been able to give a straight answer if I was given the if I was asked the same question.
But no, as you said, I mean, the beauty of those sensors, the C300 and the C70 is, as you mentioned, for every pixel you get the best of the highlights, the best of the shadows combined. And that's the beauty of those sensors, that you're really getting the best of both worlds in each pixel. And it just makes it versatile. It means that you have 16 stops of dynamic range, which before was not something you would consider possible in a digital camera. So it's really fantastic. And again, it's size matters. With the C300 and the C70, it depends on your project. I mean, what feeling do you want to have? What kind of interviews are you doing? Are you doing interviews? Are you doing broadcast? Are you doing documentary? All these questions matter, and that's all prep, and that's why determining your gear in prep is really, it's really going to have a ripple effect across everything that you do. How much time do you have for post? What size can you shoot? Like, all of these questions are just really massively important.
Yeah, definitely agree. We have a question from Fiona. I believe this is probably more about the conceptual images that you've taken, covering a number of projects. So Fiona is asking if you think you've moved from an observer to a conduit, and what other key questions you would basically do you use with yourself and then the client if it's someone who's asked you basically to do the project, and how do you envision your audience? Actually, a good question, Fiona.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. Can you run me through just the beginning of that question? Because it's a three-part question, just the first part.
So moving from an observer to conduit. So I guess from an observer to a driving seat, isn't it, in a way?
Okay.
And then are there any key questions that you tend to use?
Yeah.
To get to basically that concept?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, I guess that's interesting, because being behind a camera, you are an observer, but I always feel like I'm participating, I'm collaborating. It feels like when you're doing a conceptual image, if you really want to get the truth of the story and you also want to feel a part of it, you have to collaborate. So all of the shoots that I put together have been planned through conversations that I have with people, and we come to the concepts together. So in that way, I think it's very much going beyond just observing, and it's kind of a mutual creation. Questioning wise, I always start with, whatever it is that they want to share with me. So if there's an experience, for example, a sexual violence survivor or someone who's been imprisoned or something like this, is what did that feel like? What was it like to go through that? And what stayed with you? If they're still going through it, is, how do you feel about that? And sometimes the answers are triggering. So when I was working on the sexual violence project, which took many years, I was working with various therapists to help me put together my line of questioning, help me put together whether people were ready to participate or not. And that's the part that you have to really gauge, is this person going to be helped by taking part? And in some instances, for example, somebody had been sexually assaulted very, very recently. They still hadn't figured out what exactly they were doing, and they wanted to take part. And at that point, there was just too much going on. And in some cases, there were people that at that moment were not ready, but then maybe 4 years later, I came back to them and they were. And so I think when you have something that sensitive, having either a psychotherapist that helps you is also good, or even having gone through therapy yourself, that in itself already gives you a bit of a guideline. I also ask, were there any colors or textures or images that kind of stayed with you about this? And that's where the process of the imagination starts to arise. It's there's never going to be two equal answers, even though, there might be two people that say, I felt like I was drowning. But then when you ask more and say, tell me more about what that's like, one person's going to feel they're drowning in the ocean, one person's feel like, they're drowning in a bunch of leaves. You just don't know what each person's going to say. And it's about trying to get into the imagination reel that each person carries in their mind, and accessing it, that really starts to make the images really obvious and really, really beautiful as well, in a strange way. So that's that part. What was the third question? I blame it on it being 6 a.m.
Oh yeah, and actually I was going to say, you're not a coffee drinker, so I can't say you haven't had your coffee, because for me it would have been the coffee.
Water.
How do you envision your audience?
Right. So I think there's several kinds of audiences. The first one is people that have gone through the same. So it's building community and people that can see that they're not the only ones that have gone through something. And I feel that that generates a lot of processing, empathy, sometimes relief. And then the other audience is somebody that's completely removed from the stories, that is like, okay, I've never even experienced this, that realize, oh, this is, in the case of sexual violence, much more common than I would have thought. This is a project that I started doing well before the whole Me Too movement and all that. So it was about opening up the dialogue And just, at this point, just keeping that discourse going, because a lot of people seem to think, I would never go through that. That's something that happens over there. And even with the whole Me Too thing, and they're like, yeah, it happens in Hollywood. It doesn't really happen in my company. It doesn't really happen in my family. But if you look at statistics, it actually happens all the time. And so I find that every person can relate in some way. And even if it is just learning what it's like to go through something like that, I find that that is a way to generate empathy. So it's just about reaching more people, and again, building those bridges of communication through image making, which for me is so important. Oh, I cannot hear you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Elisa. With obviously all the projects you've done and been going to conflict zones, etc., have you ever been in a situation where you felt kind of threatened? You maybe felt you were not safe, and how did you deal with that? Just in case anyone listening maybe looking to get into photojournalism or and find themselves in that situation, what advice would you give?
First of all, I would say don't set foot in a conflict zone without having been hostile environment trained before. You want to get hostile environment training. There's a lot of grants for young filmmakers and journalists if you want to go into that field. And really just take your time, know all that you can about emergencies, first aid, response. So that's also very important. And then, just figure out your gear. That part is paramount, and know your limits. You don't have to drop yourself into like the worst situation in the world at the first instance. Go to a protest wherever it is that you are. There's protests all over the world. Cover a protest locally, and then build up. I would say take it in staggered stages. I've had many times where I've been petrified at what's going on around me, and I've had I had an instance covering the Raba Massacre in Cairo, where Morsi, the first elect president of Egypt, was deposed by the military and led by the now current president Sisi. And basically there was a lot of killings, and the Muslim Brotherhood Party and supporters, there were many people that were being killed on their side. So I remember going and covering the protests. One time 120 people were killed, and I thought, oh my God, this is horrendous. There were mosques that were turned into field hospitals. And then a few days later, they actually tried to clear this camp, which had people that had come in the thousands from all over Egypt. And basically the military came in. They said they were going to have water tanks, but they actually had snipers. They had tanks. They had all different kinds of things. They burnt hospitals where lots of people were burnt alive, and a lot of good journalists died that day, and a lot of people died that day. And there's still no like firm figures, and they range from anywhere from I think like 700 to 2,000 or something. But yeah, when you're in situations like that, you are scared, and it's about knowing, am I able to operate under that level of pressure? And for various reasons, I could. But it's also how are you going to take care of yourself emotionally, psychologically after that. There was a time in the same period where my camera was taken from me. I had a group of men surround me and take my camera from me, and I had a backpack with some lenses and stuff, and they wanted to take that off, but it was a strap on, so they couldn't. And it was just about being very, very non-confrontational, just being like, look, I luckily had put my memory cards in a safe place that I will not describe, and they wanted to destroy it, and I was just putting my hands gently on theirs. I was shaking it, and I was like, no, there's nothing there. With my very limited Arabic, it's like, look, there's no images, just I'm not here to hurt. I'm not here to do anything to hurt you. And then they were going to go away with it, and I had to chase after them, because at that point I needed my camera. And so I just had to go after them, just go, hey, look, I kind of need this tool, like, please, let's. And eventually I managed to get it back and stuff, but I was petrified. I mean, when I got home, I think I kissed the floor. I was just like, oh my God. In fact, I couldn't make it home that day. I had to stay at a random building that I had stayed at previously, because there was so many shootouts, I couldn't actually make it back to my flat. So I ended up knocking on someone's door and just going, I need to send these photos out. I need to use your Wi-Fi. Can I stay here? And I did. So yeah, it's about staying creatively nimble and just knowing your boundaries as best you can, and just navigating. It's constant navigating.
Yeah, I mean, as scary as that did actually sound, it didn't stop you from doing that again and again. I guess you just learned from the experience, isn't it? Was it because if anyone watching wanted to do or to cover similar, basically a project, similar nature of the projects, we don't want to scare them off. But obviously you've learned from it, and I guess you found different ways of dealing with it and making sure that you're safe when going into those kind of, I guess, areas, and to make sure that you're secure and you're safe. And
yeah, and also always having your best friend on call is very helpful. I mean, I had an amazing friend that I could call at any moment, who was in Canada, and I would be like, I need to vent right now, you know, and that was very helpful. Maybe a therapist on call, I don't know, anything.
So if for someone thinking of getting into either photo or video journalism, what advice would you give them? I mean, how do they get started? Anything that they should probably look for or start with?
It's similar to the advice for, I think it was Lily, in that you need to figure out the stories that you want to tell. Do you want to tell? I mean, journalism is vast. You know, there's business journalism, there's corporate journalism, there's politics, there's conflict, there's all these different kinds of things. So got to figure out, like, what doesn't mean that you can't overlap. It just means what is the one that's calling you to move into that field. And then once you figured it out, is start reaching out, start doing it. I mean, the best advice that I got by a professor once was, if you want to shoot. And it's really that simple. If you want to be a journalist, start writing stories, start shooting those images, start doing those interviews, start building a reel, build your website, and be it. There's really nothing stopping us, you know, now, especially if you don't have access to gear, even on your phone, like, nothing is stopping you from getting out there and starting. And that's really all that has to happen. It's just starting and building up your body of work and pitching. You can pitch stories to editors, you can pitch stories to broadcasters, you can go to film festivals. You get the Sheffield Doc Festival is amazing in the UK. And just putting yourself out there. There's really no direct strategy other than just starting and doing it.
Thank you for the advice, Lisa. In terms of using the kit, so we've mentioned already that sometimes you shoot handheld. Do you use any? I guess that would depend on the product, the camera you're using, but rigs, gimbals, etc. Is that something that you tend to use as well for those projects?
Not if I'm in a conflict area, not if I'm in a humanitarian crisis. Yes, if I'm like in a dock in a more, you know, controlled environment. I've used a Ronin and I've used a Movi in the past. And yeah, I mean, I really like working with them, but again, you know, when you're traveling and stuff, you can't take like a whole Steadicam rig unless you have a proper huge, you know, amount of production and cases and all these things coming along. So I tend to keep it on the smaller side. And sometimes even just having a monopod, you know, if you have to be really, really run and gun, but you still want that little bit of extra stabilization, just dropping on a monopod takes no time, and you can go do it, shoot, go, and it's quite helpful. So it really depends. Again, it depends on the project, but yeah, I have used those before.
Okay, going back to the C70.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not sure what combination you had, but have you tested or used the C70 with the new adapter and the EF lenses? Oh, okay. Definitely something that you need to try.
Yes, 100%. But one thing also that was very cool about the C70 was being able to shoot 120 frames per second, which was awesome because the autofocus on slow-mo is also great. Because I did it with people that were mountain biking, and I didn't even know that they were mountain biking. It just turned out that a person was coming down a hill, or a small mountain hill, I don't know. And I just turned and switched it quickly and just went, oh, I hope I got that. And it really just locked in. I mean, it's really a great camera for that last minute. It's like everything is happening, you know, at the same time, and you need a camera that just helps you. That camera helps you. I really did enjoy working with that.
Yeah, I mean, the C70 can do, as you said, 4K up to 120 with autofocus, which is crazy because going back a few years, I mean, if you had to go that high, you had to compromise on the focus, and you have to go manual focus, or there are other limitations. I mean, with the C70 as well, you're even looking at the audio as well, with the high frame rate, because that's usually a no. You go high frame rate and then you're losing the audio. So I think it's a great combination. But as I said, the adapter, which you definitely need to try the next time you use the C70, the new one, to use obviously mainly for those with those out there having EF lenses. You can use your EF lens on the C70, but on the top of that is you get the full frame field of view. So if you can imagine, C70 is a super 35 mil. So there is a slight crop when you put any RF lens on it, or even EF lenses with the standard adapters that we have with the R5 and the R6. But with this new adapter, you actually get a full frame field of view. So it's a 16 mil is a 16 mil, a 24 is a 24, and then you get one stop of light, which is even better. So it said if you shoot it in if your lens is an f4, you'll end up with a 2.8, or if it's 2.8, you'll end up with an f2. That again can be a great advantage if you're shooting, as I said, in challenging lighting situations and you need to add more light to your scene. But yeah, I think for anyone with the C70 who haven't tried the adapter, definitely worth having a look at. I mean, you find all the details of the adapter or the C70 on the WEX website. But yeah, definitely, as I said, we do have super 35mm cinema cameras. We have full frame cinema cameras. And the fact that you can actually have both options with the C70 once you use the adapter is great.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I guess one question that I was going to have for you was, once you put this adapter on with the RF lenses, does it diminish the speed
with the EF lenses? Sorry,
with EF only. Okay, right.
I have one actually right here. So this is the adapter. As I said, there is the standard adapter that we launched with the EOS R actually. That you can just basically put it on the R5, and the R6 just to allow you to use EF lenses, which is still fine with this. But if you were to use, this is the new adapter. As I said, any EF lens, the majority of them obviously are going to have the full frame angle of view. You can actually maintain that on the C70. If you're using the RF lenses, obviously because the RF is going directly onto the camera, so you are getting the super 35 look, which is still, as I said, the most common one when it comes to cinema cameras, unless, as I said, you're going full frame. And with the RF lenses, obviously, you do get the added benefit of the focus being even faster, the image stabilization working even better. So there are advantages of using RF lenses. As I said, having said that, now obviously we have an extensive range of EF lenses that I'm pretty sure loads of people watching will have, and you can still use them with the C70, or as I said, with the with as I said, with the other EOS R system cameras. I think I'm trying to keep an eye on the questions, so we don't have any more questions. I mean, what I guess if there is one probably advice for everyone, photographer or cinematographer, probably starting out, what advice? Because I think sometimes we tend to focus a lot more on the kit than anything else, which is, I mean, I guess obviously you will need a kit to take stills or to shoot video. But what will be probably the number one tick on the list to get them started? As I said, irrespective of whether they're going into photo or video.
Yeah, I think it's just being really transparent about what makes you passionate about it, because that will inform the tech. You know, if you're a very technical person, you're going to learn that anyways. If you're not, your passion's going to lead the way for you to inform yourself on that side as well. And vice versa. If your passion is the tech, you know, then that's going to inform, you know, all the possibilities of what you can shoot with that tech is what's going to inform a lot of your stories. So I think it's what's driving you, what's your driver, what's your passion, what's your goal, and that will inform everything else. I mean, tech is necessary. There's no way of saying, oh, you're just going to be a really creative person, you're not going to know the tech. You need to have both sides. But yeah, I think it's just about knowing what your driver is and always taking time to fuel your passion, because otherwise passions can die, you know, and they morph and evolve, and that's fine, but don't let it die. So yeah, I think that would be it.
Thank you. We do actually just question just came in. So yeah, it's a question from Adil. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Would you recommend having a variety of cameras for different storytelling situations?
Okay, that's a difficult question, because storytelling, I mean, if you want to elaborate a little bit on what you mean by storytelling, because it's a broad gamut of world out there that involves everything from feature drama films, commercials, to photojournalism on the field. And you have very, very, very different cameras for each of this. So I find having one camera that's like my go-to, I have a project tomorrow and I have to ship off to some country and I've got this, that's great. I wouldn't go ahead and buy tons of cameras personally, because I would probably be renting them for each project, depending on what the project needs. Sorry. But I mean, it depends on you. Each person has their own answer, I think, but that's just my strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you said, you would have one camera that you would use for probably, I don't know, 70-80% of the projects, but specific cameras for specific jobs, you would, as I said, there are, yes, true, there are people that would have 2, 3, 4 cameras. They basically own them, and you do have others that actually they choose to go for the hire or the rental. I guess it depends on budgets and sometimes giving yourself the flexibility as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I know, but also being aware of, like, you know, cameras do evolve quite quickly, you know, and Canon has put out a lot of products in the last year, right? So it's like, it's also seeing where the wheel is turning to and how much use are you going to get of each camera that you are buying. So I still feel, you know, getting one good solid kit for, like you said, you know, most of what it is that you're doing, and then staying nimble for the rest is probably what I would do. But yeah, I mean, if you want to buy them all, please do it. I mean, sounds great. And then invite me over.
Okay, thank you. I think thank you, Elisa, for joining us, and thank you to everyone for those actually who joined us this afternoon around lunchtime, here at least. Hopefully you find all the discussion useful and inspirational as well, from Elisa. As I said, check out Elisa's work. There is a link there on the chat. Lisa, I'm going to let you go and enjoy your breakfast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thanks everyone again. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.